If you haven't ordered your copy of Peter Hart's new book, The Gallipoli Evacuation, now is the time to do it. The Gallipoli Evacuation was one of the most important chapters of the entire Gallipoli story, and this is the first book to explore it in detail. From dithering politicians in London, to the winter storms, to the ingenious ruse that enabled the Allies to escape, such as the self-firing rifles and the silent periods, this book tells the whole gripping story of this life and death gamble. And Peter Hart really is the man to tell this story with his wonderful writing style, his insightful accounts of the history, and most importantly, his use of quotes from veterans of the campaign. The story of the Gallipoli evacuation is really told in the words of the men who were there. The book is now available in softcover or ebook, and you can order it all over the world and pay in your local currency. So visit our website, livinghistorytv.com, to order your copy today.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart, and for the last 40 years I've interviewed thousands of veterans about their experience of war. Join me on a journey through the pages of history. Welcome to Peter Hart's Military History.
Hello and welcome to Peter Hart's Military History Podcast. And here I am with lovely Gary Bain. The talk of East Finchley, the talk of North Tottenham, the talk of everywhere.
Hello, Pete.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well. Just one small thing. When I say it's a cloud on the horizon, it is actually a sort of vapour, a sort of poisonous odour that surrounds us. Is that you, Gary?
No, that's the dog, and you know it is. The dog's in the room, and he's started as he means to go on.
Excellent. Odour Fred?
Odour Fred. Now, I think it's really good of you to give me some sort of hint as to what we're doing today. So I've got to guess what we're doing based on what you're wearing. So you've got a leather flying helmet on, goggles, and a tutu.
That's it.
So it must be James McCudden.
It is James McCudden. You are a genius. Genius. Spot on. The ultimate professional air fighter, Gary. The ultimate professional. So who is he? Well, he was born 28th of March 1895. That's long ago. In Gillingham, or Gillingham as you would call it. And he's the son of a Sergeant Major, William McCudden, Royal Engineer. They moved to Sheerness. Those two towns are still arguing as to who owns McCudden. I own him. No, we own him.
I've been to Sheerness.
Yeah, they've not got much going for them.
He wouldn't claim them, to be frank.
Oh,
no offence to anybody listening that comes from Sheerness.
I think it's too late, mate. And he worked as a post office messenger boy before joining the Royal Engineers as a bugler in 1910. Bit of a spot in Gibraltar, but he has an interest in aviation. He used to watch the Airy Plonks, I think, at Sheerness. And he joins the Royal Flying Corps soon after its formation. So he joins in about 1913, where he was based at the Farnborough Depot. Now, here, there is I read a couple of biographies of McCudden, and there's an absolutely cracking accident where he's sort of messing about with Cauldron Type A, and he thinks it's not in gear or whatever you do with airplanes, and he accidentally and it runs amok. It sort of goes charging out of the hangar, and what does it do? It badly damages a Farnham, and then this wouldn't cause any offence to anyone. It completely wrecks the Colonel's car. That's no less a figure than Colonel Frederick Sykes, a tolerant and easygoing man.
Good humour.
Good humour. Famous Sykes for his good humour. Yeah. Anyway, he gets 7 days detention and 14 days loss of pay. What do you think of that?
Hang on, wait a minute. I got more than that for just being drunk and 50 yards away from somebody who put a brick through a window.
Yes. I think this is, sometimes you're doing history and you think, there's more to be explained than you think.
Yes.
This story doesn't add up. You wreck an aeroplane and the Colonel's car, and you get 7 days and 14 days loss of pay. I think Sykes may have taken a shine to him.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, he was posted shortly afterwards to the 3 Squadron Royal Flying Corps, a fine body of men. And I think we'll move on to that's in June 1913, and they're at Netheravon, and they're going to set off for war. War comes, Gary, in August 1914.
Now, as is traditional, I'm going to mention Major Chris Carling at this point because, if you'll pardon the expression, he took me up to Netheravon.
He took you up the Netheravon?
He took me up to Netheravon and he showed me around, and it's still there today. And it's quite an interesting little base. I think it's still there now. He was in charge of I think it was the toilet block, something like that.
He has a penchant for urinals.
And it's funny how he's featuring in all these podcasts. He's getting everywhere.
He is getting everywhere. That's his reputation. So you say. Now, in actual fact, the officers' mess at Netheravon is still a RFC, and it's got a lot of RFC memorabilia. So I urge you to visit it. No need to make an appointment. Just walk into the base and have a look round.
You might need to make an appointment.
No harm will come to you, punters. Anyway, so now there's an unfortunate incident. We'll have to change the mood a bit because McCudden swings the prop of an aircraft crewed by Second Lieutenant Robert Skeen with the air mechanic Keith Barlow. And there's a bit of a disaster, isn't there? Can you take us through this? Change your tone?
Yeah, so air mechanic James McCudden, 3 Squadron RFC. We then heard the engine stop, and following that, the awful crash, which once heard is never forgotten. I found them both dead. I shall never forget that morning, at about 6:30, kneeling by poor Keith Barlow and looking at the rising sun, and then again at poor Barlow, who had no superficial injury and was killed purely by concussion, and wondering if war was going to be like this always.
Sensitive soul at times, anyway. I don't know what will happen to him later on in the war. Do you think he'll perhaps become more of a soldier type, or do you think he'll always have the soul of a poet?
Let's not give away the story, Pete.
Absolutely,
let's
Gary.
Not give it away too early.
Anyway, he's an engine fitter with 3 Squadron on the Western Front throughout 14 and 15. And some of the airfields were quite primitive, weren't they, Gary? You've got a story you like, haven't you?
And the aircraft, although let's remember that these were actually state-of-the-art for the time.
But they looked primitive to our eyes.
To our eyes, yes. You see all the triple wings and the string holding it together and
triple wing. I think that's a bit like you've gone too early.
Plasters and bits of glue and planks of wood nailed on and all that sort of thing.
Okay, Gary, you're an expert on First World War airplanes.
I'm clearly demonstrating that expertise. Air mechanic James McCudden, 3 Squadron RFC, goes on to say, we arrived here and found the proposed aerodrome was a beet field. Some Indian cavalry had a roller. Wow, that's flash. And we're hang on. Here's a lesson in reading ahead, Pete. Some Indian cavalry had a roller and were attempting to level the uneven ground. Not the roller, I presumed.
You thought a Rolls Royce,
I thought Rolls Royce. Well,
I don't think they'd met Mr. Rolls and Mr. Royce in 1914.
And we're attempting to level the uneven ground, while every available man in the squadron turned out to be marched up and down the field to harden the ground and press down the beet roots. We spent a whole afternoon doing this, and although the ground was very soft, it was good enough to land upon when we'd finished.
Wow, that's a little bit dodgy, I say, but so not exactly the state-of-the-art airfield. Now, there's also problems with the weather in those early days. You've got another story, haven't you, air mechanic James McCudden?
Rain pouring in torrents, wind howling like mad, and all the hangars level with the ground, flapping about the machines. To make things more cheerful, there were deep ditches around the hangars to catch the water, and every minute or so one heard a loud splash to the accompaniment of curses and oaths as some unfortunate mechanic fell into one of these drainage pools.
That quote was just there for me to amuse me. Now, he went on the occasional unofficial, he's not an observer, but he went on the occasional mission, just armed with a rifle. That's all they could get in the air in those days. And in November 1914, he's obviously got over that little accident early in his career, and he's promoted to corporal. Now, it could be dangerous even on the ground, and there's a terrible story about how some bombs on a Moraine parasol of Captain Reginald Cholmondeley They were loading the bombs on board at Henge on 12th of March 1915, ready for a raid on the Don railway station. And Corporal James McCudden, you take on the story. Can I call you Jimmy, or would that be a little familiar?
That's a little familiar. You could call me Big G, though.
Big G. It's J.
All right, spelling was never a strong point. We were using ordinary army shells, converting them with a fuse cap which exploded on contact with the ground.
I could see what could go wrong here.
Yes. These bombs were inserted into aluminium tubes made in the station workshops, and a pin was pushed through to hold the bomb in position. Oh dear. When the pilot wished to drop the bomb, he leaned over the side, pulled the pin out, and away went the bomb. On this particular occasion, Captain Cholmondeley was in the aircraft. The mechanic was busy putting the bomb in, and he thought the pin was there. Instead, the bomb came down the tube. He put his knee under it to stop the bomb, and the whole thing went up. Now, McCudden, he literally just walked past the machine when the bomb exploded behind him. And he goes on to say, I had just got to my flight sheds when crump, crump, came two explosions in quick succession, and I distinctly felt the displacement of air. I turned round and saw Captain Cholmondeley's, that's easy to say, Cholmondeley's moraine on fire from wingtip to wingtip. I ran over to render assistance and found about a dozen men lying around the moraine, all badly mutilated. Owing to the moraine being on fire and still more bombs being in the machine, we got away the wounded quickly.
That's quite brave, though, actually, isn't it? I mean, they got the wounded away, despite the risk of more explosions. That's quite impressive. April 15, he's promoted to sergeant. But there's sad news as well, isn't there? His brother William McCudden is killed in an air crash. And James McCudden always believed it was because his brother had been strapped in during the crash. He'd been strapped in with their safety belt. What's that to do with? We'll find out later, I think. By then he's going up as an occasional observer throughout 15, and he shows himself a steady man, doesn't he, in the Fokker scourge?
Oh, you mean the Eindecker scourge?
Well, yes, Gary. Where are you going with this?
Well, I just can't believe the language you're using talking about those Fokkers.
I apologise unreservedly. You can Immelman off. And they were, by now, because of the Fokkers, they were flying in formations, early formation flying. And we did this, didn't we, in our 1915 air warfare. So we're not going to go through the quotes again. But what happened is McCudden's up with in a formation of three. A couple of 4 days earlier, Second Lieutenant Hobbs and Tudor Jones had been killed by Immelman trying to carry out a reconnaissance mission. And now he goes up and due to flying in formation and combining together, they were able to beat off the Fokker attacks. Now, what's interesting here for us now is how is McCudden's attitude to this incident. Well, if you want to hear more about the incident, listen to our 1915 podcast. But what was McCudden's attitude?
He says, I was very thankful indeed to return from this outing. I had imagined that if once Immelman and in his Fokker saw us, there was not much chance for us. However, we live and learn. Now, we've discussed this in a number of podcasts, not only our own, what sort of man he was. But, you know, at the risk of repeating myself, he really did learn. He learnt, became methodical, and practised and practised and practised. He learnt from every experience he had.
Much akin to yourself, then.
Yes.
He made an application to train as a pilot, but funnily enough, you've served in the forces, and I think this is one of the things that held you back. People don't want to promote away. He was a highly skilled and competent senior NCO mechanic. Do you think his officers wanted to get rid of him?
No, because they're going to want to keep a very, very skilled mechanic for their own selfish reasons. I mean, he was very good at what he did.
Well, eventually he got his way. In January 16, he's promoted to flight sergeant and sent home for flying training. And he made his first solo flight on 16th of April 1916. It goes well, and in July 16, he's posted to fly the two-seater pusher aircraft, FE-2B, with 20 Squadron. If you were an aircraft, you wouldn't be a Fokker, you'd be a pusher.
Yeah, so we're basically saying that's with the propeller at the rear of the plane, doing exactly as it describes, pushing the plane.
Learnt so much.
Well, it's the same principle as the modern jet aircraft, isn't it? It's exactly the same principle.
I think so.
Yeah.
But probably we'll get a horde of people saying,
Yeah,
no,
they're going to tell us it's absolutely nothing to do
with it whatsoever.
Bear in mind, I was just talking about triple wings a minute ago.
Yeah, you
They'll
will.
let
They
me
do
off.
have triple wings before and later.
Yeah, they'll let me off.
They will let you off because they love you like a
Twitter
brother.
is a forgiving environment.
It is. I've always thought that they've forgiven you for your duck's legs disease. They'll forgive you for anything. He's with 20 Squadron on FE-2Bs, but nothing much to report there. In August, he's put on the single-seater DH-2s. They're also a pusher, but what do you think the difference is between a single-seater and a two-seater?
The number of seats?
Yes. Oh, I don't know why I bother asking you questions. I should just presume you know these things. He scored his first victory on the 6th of September, so that's 16. And on 8th September, there's a more interesting where he has another close encounter with what you would call a 9-decker and I would call a Fokker.
Flight Sergeant James McCudden, 29 Squadron RFC. I fired a red light to draw the attention of the rest of the patrol and then turned nose on to the Fokker. We both opened fire together at about 300 yards range. After firing about 3 shots, my gun stopped, and whilst I was trying to rectify the stoppage, the Fokker turned round behind me and had again opened fire. I now did a silly thing. Instead of revving round and waiting for the other 2 DH-2s to help me, I put my engine off and dived, but not straight. The Fokker followed, shooting as opportunity offered, and I could hear his bullets coming far too close to be healthy. At one time I glanced up and saw him just 100 feet above me, following my S-turns.
That's pretty exciting. What happens next then?
Well, he eventually gets his gun going and he puts the engine back on and he zooms up and he says, the Fokker zoomed also, but passed above and in front of me. Now was my opportunity, which I seized with alacrity. Was that word there to catch me out, Pete?
I didn't say it.
I elevated my gun and fired a few shots at him from under his fuselage, but my gun again stopped. The Fokker, whose pilot apparently had lost sight of me, dived steeply, and I followed feeling very brave. Again, I got my gun to function, but the Fokker had easily outdived me. My lucky star undoubtedly shone again on this day, for the Fokker had only managed to put 2 bullets through my machine. So I was indeed... Will you stop laughing? So I was indeed thankful, for if the German had only been a little skillful, I think he would have got me. But still, this was all very good experience for me, and if one gets out of such tight corners, it increases one's confidence enormously. Now, we've spoken previously about how the leaps in technology give you the advantage, and clearly the Fokkers have the advantage, because even though he's referring to him as not having, much skill, a little more skillful, the Fokker was outmanoeuvring and probably would have outmanoeuvred a lesser pilot. And of course, the Fokkers would have been fitted with the Spandau machine gun with the interrupters through the propeller, so able to fire from the front, and I'm assuming the DH-2s had the Lewis gun.
A single Lewis to unfitted. Now, I would say the DH-2 and the Fokker are roughly speaking equal, but if your machine gun jams, you're helpless. So there is an interesting point about that. The Fokkers, the DH-2, in the end, with the FE-2B, do end the Fokker scourge. But this is the point. If your machine gun doesn't work, you are helpless.
And how many rounds were there in the magazine?
47 I'm going for.
47. So, I mean, it could be 47 or 97.
I don't think they had the double ones there.
So they didn't fit them to the aircraft.
I thought that was 17, but you know me and memory.
No, it's perfectly possible. But I just wanted to see if you could remember how many rounds there were in the Lewis. Yes, it is.
I've learned so much. Do you think I'll remember?
No.
All right. Now, well, the other thing is McCudden's learning again, isn't he? And it's this that makes him the potential to become a lethal pilot. Was everything he experiences, he seems to store away in his memory banks. He's commissioned, on the 1st of January 17, so he's a second lieutenant now. You weren't commissioned, were you?
Not until after I left the forces.
No, that's not your brief period as a commissionaire. I think you're misunderstanding the word there. So he commit, and he's getting better and better as a combat flyer. And on the 23rd of February, he's had his first stint. By then, he got the 5 victories necessary to become counted as an ace. Now, you were surprised it was so few, weren't you?
I always am. You know, I think the natural assumption is when you talk about an ace is somebody with, dozens of victories. The Richtophens of this world, the Albert Balls.
That would be the case later on, but this is early in the war, and people just haven't. It had only been going aerial fighting and aeroplanes capable of shooting each other. So 5 seemed a lot then.
Yeah.
Later on, it doesn't seem so much. Now, he's posted as an instructor to training establishments, finishing up at Dover, where he would fly the Sopwith Pup. And amongst his pupils would be Edward Mannock. And there's a demonstration of his flying. Edward.
Mick Mannock.
You're so familiar.
Oh. I might be getting him confused with.
And so here's second lieutenant. I'm going to be really formal. JCF Hopkins, RFC, and Hopkins says this: McCudden was a brilliant pilot, absolutely outstanding. I saw him do the most hair-raising stunts around the aerodrome, where he was demonstrating what a pup could do. His favourite was to loop directly off the ground when he was taking off and continue looping. Once he looped 13 times from takeoff, and when he finished, he was 500 feet high. A wonderful piece of flying. Or he would go up to about 1,000 feet, turn the machine upside down, and just go round the airfield till the engine stopped. Then he'd go on gliding. Next thing, he'd roll it out, get the engine going again, and away he'd go. He was absolutely marvellous. There wasn't a thing he couldn't do with that machine.
Yes. Okay. So from my own mind, Pete, in order to gain height at this point, were the aircrafts able to climb in, the modern way, or did they have to go around in circles to gain height? I'm just thinking about, looping on takeoff.
Well, looping is just very dangerous indeed, and it's stunting. You shouldn't be doing it, really, but they were. When we think, McCudden was quite quiet, but there is a touch of the show-off about him at times. Funnily enough, most people describe him as an excellent pilot and a steady pilot and an accurate pilot. So this oral history account shows that he could show off as well, and perhaps that'll come into the story later on. Now, at this time, he's also involved in the Gotha bomber raids. There's a couple of stories here that you're going to read. 13th of June 1917, there's the Gotha raid on London. I think that's the one where the Upper North School was hit and a lot of kids killed. And some 92 aircraft take off. But they're not organised at all, and they can't get the necessary altitude. A lot of them aren't very good aircraft. But one of those chasing them was McCudden, and you're now going to be captain. Another promotion, Gary?
Yeah, he's promoted again.
He's on the Home Establishment, but tell us this story.
So, Captain James McCudden, Home Establishment, RFC. To my dismay, I found that I could not lessen the range to any appreciable extent. By the time I got to 500 feet under the rear machine, we were 20 miles east of the Essex coast, and visions of a very long swim entered my mind. So I decided to fire all my ammunition and then depart. To my intense chagrin, the last Hun did not take the slightest notice. How insolent those damn Boches did look, absolutely lording the sky over England. I was absolutely furious to think that the Huns should come over and bomb London and have it practically all their own way. I simply hated the Hun more than ever.
Crikey. Oh dear. There was another raid on 7th of July, the bombs tumbling down over the East End and the city this time, and he takes off again in his Sopwith Pup. And this is Second Lieutenant JCF Hopkins, who saw him go. And this is a great quote. He obviously wanted to go and tackle these blighters. He went almost mad rushing about. I believe his Vickers gun was not loaded, but he had a Lewis gun on the top plane. He was dashing round, grabbing magazines of ammunition, all he could get from various mechanics. He stuck these in the wire around his cockpit, and away he went. Now, you taking up the story, Mr. McCudden. Tell us what happened.
I dived on the rearmost machine and fired a whole drum at close range. In diving, I came rather too near the top plane of the Gotha, or Gotha, and had to level out so violently to avoid running into him that the downward pressure of my weight as I pulled the joystick back was so great that my seat bearers broke, and I was glad it wasn't my wings. I remained above again and now thought of a different way to attack the rearmost Gotha. I put on a new drum and dived from the Hun's right rear to within 300 feet, when I suddenly swerved and, changing over to his left rear, closed to within 50 yards and finished my drum before the enemy gunner could swing his gun from the side at which I first dived. I zoomed away, but the Hun still appeared to be okay. Then I put on my third and last drum and made up my mind that I should have a good go at getting him. I repeated the manoeuvre of changing from one side to the other and had the satisfaction of seeing my tracer bullet strike all about his fuselage and wings, but beyond causing the Gotha to push his nose down a little, it had not the desired effect. I was very disappointed, for I now had nothing else to do except fly alongside the Huns and make faces at them.
Now, the reason he was doing that was he was hoping that other aircraft... He was trying to distract the Germans so that other aircraft could attack. He was very, McCudden-like, annoyed that nobody did. So he wasn't being as facetious as that quote makes it sound. June 17, he goes back to the Western Front, this time for a brief period flying a Sopwith Pup with 66 Squadron. But uneventful period, and then a key period in his life comes when in August 1917 he's posted as a flight commander flying the SE-5A Scout Experimental Mark V variant A. What a name to conjure with, Gary. With 56 Squadron. 56 Squadron was sort of supposed to be an Aces Squadron. That's not really the British way, but if there ever was an Aces Squadron, it would be 56 Squadron. Some of the very best pilots were with them. But I'm not sure it was intended to be such. You'd have to ask Alex Revel. He's written a brilliant book on 56 Squadron called something about high and blue. It's got those words in it. Anyway, he was now, I think, would you say he was ready for his moment? What state's he in to take this role up?
Well, he's in good condition. He very, 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 very rarely drank. He was physically fit. He kept himself in good shape. So, yeah, I think he's probably ready now. And clearly he'd got a lot of experience by now.
Yeah, he's got his natural flying ability, which we've seen demonstrated, his shooting ability, and attention to detail on the ground. He always makes sure his engine's running. He get every bit of power he can from his engine. His machine guns, he checks, rechecks, makes sure that the bullets are properly loaded. And the belt checks everything. He aligns his sights, trues up the machine guns to the sights. He does everything possible to avoid the gun jamming. Now, remember him learning that lesson?
Yeah, because that was quite common at the time.
It was. And as you say, he drank. He kept him in shape. Now, this is Equipment Officer Lieutenant Hubert Charles, 56 Squadron. Hubert. Captain McCudden was punctilious to a degree. Always very smart on parade. He was a man who kept himself extraordinarily fit and was a very good pilot. But far more than that, he was a shooting genius. He changed where he came from.
Yeah, I think Lieutenant Hubert Charles was actually from Scotland.
Yes, I knew. His shooting was spectacular. It's what makes a good shot, would you say, Gary?
Well, he's going to have to... We've covered this off before. Good pilots have got very, very good eyesight. Very good. Superb hand-eye coordination. And, but basically, determination as well comes into this. You know, we probably cover this off later. You know, the Knights of the Air thing, and just putting yourself in a good position.
And endless practice, do you think? I know.
Oh, he was incredible, wasn't he? You mentioned the almost anal way that he approached checking everything. That's very Royal Engineers, isn't it, really? The beard stroker in him. But, yeah, I mean, he would practice for hours and hours. He'd practice on the ground, in the air, all the time.
So here's a quote from Lieutenant Thomas Isbell, who was 41 Squadron, and he saw McCudden practice.
Where's he from?
I don't know. We'll find out.
We'll find out when you start speaking.
I've seen McCudden shoot at targets. We'd all go up and we'd fire at the target. But McCudden would come down and he would tear the target to shreds. He had such a wonderful way of shooting. When it was, well, what it was, no one seemed to know. You might fly along and fly 200 bullets and the machine still goes floating on. Not a bit of damage done, but he only had to fire a matter of 200 rounds and the machine seemed to fall to pieces.
Sorry, Peter, I'll just correct you there. He only had to fire a matter of 20 rounds.
Oh, yeah?
Each material.
I was concentrating on the accent and not on the reading.
It's like being in Wales. It's incredible.
Wales, you bastard! I spent all that time practising my Brummie. His eyesight was exceptional, and also it's his experience. In the air, he always seemed to see the enemy before they saw him. They call it air vision. He had it. He could see an aircraft, almost sense when they were there. And then he would stalk them, Gary. Stalk them like a stalky thing. Until he could, so get close where they can't see you, and then kill them, shoot them down, murderously accurate, no mercy, no nothing. Is he a Knight of the Air, or is he like McCudden? Don't you find this is like McCudden? Not McCudden, like Manic.
Well, I think that a number of the aces, it's like Richtofen. You know, they all put themselves in advantage to kill the opposition.
So tell me, but the thing that marks him out is the attention to detail, I think. You've got a quote where you're going to say, and this is what you call the beard stroker.
Yeah, I mean, and bear in mind, this is him talking about himself. So, Captain James McCudden, 56 Squadron RFC. I'm a stickler for detail in every respect. For in aerial fighting, I am sure it is the detail that counts far more than the actual main fighting points. It may sound absurd, but such a thing as having dirty goggles makes all the difference between getting or not getting a Hun.
Wow, that's just professionalism. And then the second point, the knight errantry. How much of a bold, gay sabreur was he?
Well, he says, my system was to always attack the Hun at his disadvantage if possible. And if I were attacked at my disadvantage, I usually broke off the combat. For in my opinion, the Hun in the air must be beaten at his own game, which is cunning. I think that the correct way to wage war is to down as many as possible of the enemy at the least risk, expense and casualties to one's own side.
So, pragmatism. No fluffiness, no knight errantry, no nothing.
Yeah,
just killing.
And you know, the only possible exception to that you described him as the berserker, and in your notes you describe him as Captain Alan Ball, who I believe played in the 1966 World Cup final.
Squeaky voice Portsmouth and England midfielder.
Yes. I think that may be a mistake on your part.
It's also in one of my books. I make the same mistake. I don't know why I keep doing it. It's as if I had Alan Ball in my mind.
But you mean Albert Ball?
I do mean Albert Ball. He was the berserker tradition, and McCudden, like Manic and Richtofen, he's nothing to do with that, is he?
No. No. And it's also, you know, we've debated this in a previous podcast. You can't easily teach the berserker skill set to anybody else, but what McCudden's doing is he's laying the foundations for others to be able to be as good as he is. Now, they won't necessarily have as good eyesight and as good reactions, but methodical training, practice over and over and over again.
To get the basics instilled in everybody, and that they can then at least attempt to follow. Now, I'm beginning to get the sense that McCudden was a little competitive. Would that be right, do you think?
Yeah, and there's a quote here. He says...
I love this quote, actually.
After breakfast, I played Maybury for the ping-pong championship of 56 Squadron, and after a long tussle, Maybury won. I believe there was keener competition in the squadron to be ping-pong champion than to be the star-turned Hunstrafer.
I just like the thought of these two great pilots battering ping-pong balls between them. McCudden, by this time, is the executioner leading his flight. He's stalking and dispatching his prey, and gradually he's shooting down more and more people. His score starts to mount quite rapidly, although this is still fairly early days. But he's in a really famous dogfight on the 23rd of September 1917. He's leading B flight, that's his flight. They're on an offensive patrol over the German lines. They're nearly always over German lines in the Ypres area. And he suddenly saw an SE-5A from 60 Squadron being attacked by a lone Fokker DR-1 triplane. There's a triplane, Gary.
Thank you. How many wings does that have? 3.
And is it 1914?
No, by now it's 1917.
And who's flying this triplane?
It's being flown by Lieutenant Werner Voss of just the 10.
So one of the great German aces.
Yeah.
Now, tell me what happens, Captain James McCudden.
Down we dived at a colossal speed. I went to the right, Rhys Davids to the left, and we got behind the triplane together. The German pilot saw us and turned in the most disconcertingly quick manner. Not a climbing nor Immelmann turn, but a sort of flat half-spin. By now the German triplane was in the middle of our formation, and its handling was wonderful to behold. The pilot seemed to be firing at all of us simultaneously, and although I got behind him a second time, I could hardly stay there for a second. His movements were so quick and uncertain that none of us could hold him in sight at all for any decisive time. I now got a good opportunity as he was coming towards me nose on and slightly underneath, and had apparently not seen me. I dropped my nose and got him well in my sight and pressed both triggers. As soon as I fired, up came his nose at me, and I heard crack, 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 as his bullets passed close to me and through my wings.
Now, we've commented before that German machine guns definitely sound different from British machine guns, because ours go dagger, dagger, dagger.
Yeah, well, they've got that sort of German accent. Clack, 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 clack.
Now, Voss at this time had 48 victories, second only to Richthofen among the German aces. This is a serious... McCudden and the SE-5s, and they're good pilots. They could not shoot him down. But and Voss forced down, he didn't shoot them down, but he forced down 2 SE-5s already. And then at last, Lieutenant Arthur Rhys Davids managed to get on the Fokker's tail.
Eindeckers.
No, it's not Eindecker. Eindecker means monoplane, you tosser.
Yeah.
I had that trap for this.
I just don't want you to keep referring to the Fokkers.
Sorry. So this is Rhys Davids. He said this. Eventually I got east and slightly above the triplane and made for it, getting in a whole Lewis drum and a corresponding number of Vickers into him. He made no attempt to turn until I was so close to him that I was certain we would collide. He was a public schoolboy. He passed my right-hand wing by inches and went down. I zoomed. I saw him next with his engine apparently off, gliding west. I dived again and got one shot out of my Vickers. However, I reloaded and kept in the dive. I got in another good burst. The triplane did a slight right-hand turn, still going down. I had now overshot him. This was at 1,000 feet. Zoomed, but never saw him again. But McCudden does see the end of him, doesn't he?
He does. He says, Captain James McCudden, 56 Squadron RFC. I noticed that the triplane's movements were very erratic, and then I saw him go into a fairly steep dive, and so I continued to watch, and then saw the triplane hit the ground and disappear into 1,000 fragments, for it seemed to me that it literally went to a powder.
Now, this is it's a very famous dogfight. No one knows why Voss didn't make any real effort to escape. Nobody knows what was in his mind. Of course they don't know what was in his mind. I know Arthur Rhys Davids was very impressed by him and said, if only he could have lived. Well, he probably should have stopped shooting at him when he was fluttering down helplessly then. There you go. But poor old Rhys Davids, he'd be dead within a matter of weeks. No matter how good you were, somebody always seemed to have your number if you're a First World War ace. By December 17, McCudden shot down 14 aircraft, and reached a total of 37 by carrying. He got to 37, so I don't understand that note. Carrying out extra solo patrols on top of his routine patrols. And on the 28th of December, he shot down 4 in a day, all accounted for. 28th of December, he shot down another 3, all confirmed. And all these are since named. The pilots, the German people, it's not like some other aces where you just don't know. It's all seems almost as if it's made up. All confirmed, and he crippled a 4th. And when he landed, he said this.
When I landed, the Major said that our Archie gunners had reported Huns falling out of the sky in pieces everywhere.
It's just amazing. And he was, by now, a force of nature in the air. He really is an effective, deadly killer.
I think it's worth repeating again, but the primary role of the RFC at this time was not the scouts or fighter pilots. They were there to protect and enable the observers and the reconnaissance flights in support of the artillery.
So what you're saying is that the bloke in his RE8 or earlier the BE2C, he would kill far more Germans than any ace like McCudden.
Yeah.
And it's worth, yes, I think that's a great point that we ought to emphasise. Here we are lionising a British ace, but in actual fact, the more important role, he's almost there to protect the others. Anyway, McCudden's, he's just doing fantastic. Now, in January, there had been a restriction on naming aces in the newspapers. It was almost a secret. Unlike the German approach, who Richthofen was a national hero. I don't know why the British had this approach. Partly, I suppose, because they realised they might get killed, and that'd be a bit of a just as much you can lionise someone, but then if they're killed, it doesn't look quite so good. But by now, McCudden's a force of nature, and he particularly is useful because of his skills as an engine fitter. So when the new Rumplers and LVGs, they're reconnaissance two-seaters. And remember, we're all building up to German offensives.
Were the seats above each other?
No.
Oh, you mean one in front and one behind?
Absolutely. They're almost invulnerable for a while to interception because they could fly at 19 to 20,000 feet, and that's more than the SE-5 can reach. What does McCudden do then? And could you explain what exactly he did, Gary?
Yeah, he basically goes out, he gets a set of non-standard high-compression pistons, which he fits to his engine to gain an increase in the engine performance, whilst he took every single spare ounce of weight from the aircraft. This meant that he was able to climb faster and higher. But, of course, there are other problems then when you start getting into altitude.
We'll come to that, definitely. But does it work? Because he gets his 50 victory milestone on 16th of February. And I think you've got a quote here that shows how it works, doesn't it, Gary?
Captain James McCudden, 56 Squadron. I saw a Hun two-seater running away east, for he had apparently seen me before I'd seen him, for I was not expecting Huns over, for the visibility was not too good. But I suppose he was out for some urgent information. I now opened the throttle of the high-compression Hispano, and I overtook the LVG just as though he was going backwards, for I should judge my speed to be 20 miles faster level than his.
Can I just say, you're just sounding a little bit Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson there?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that, actually. That's very like...
woof, woof.
Yeah, it is a bit like motor racing and how they pass, cars in front and catch them. It's very interesting. I quickly got into position, and although the LVG tried hard, I presented him with a very excellent burst from both guns.
Patronising bastard.
And then he went down in a vertical nosedive, and then passed vertical onto his back. The enemy gunner shot out of the machine for all the world like a stone out of a catapult, and the unfortunate rascal seemed all arms and legs. Now, that's somebody falling to their death.
Yeah, I think that's a little chilling.
Yeah.
And he is patronising about it. He's becoming a professional killer, isn't he?
Yeah.
Remember that very first quote we had about will war always be like this? Well, it will be for some people. Now, he went up to 20,000 feet. You mentioned oxygen. Is there a problem at 21,000 feet, Gary?
Well, there's a number of problems. One is how cold it is. If you think about modern pilots today and the sort of precautions they take, so the cold could be even worse than the lack of oxygen.
I'm sure it's worse. What's the problem with lack of oxygen?
Well,
give us a quote.
It affects your performance, doesn't it? And you don't even know that it is. That's the
let's have a quote. Come on then, James McCudden. Give us a quote about how McCudden felt after one of these flights at 21,000 feet.
I felt very ill indeed. This was not due to the height or the rapidity of my descent, but was due to the intense cold that I experienced up high, so that when I got down to a lower altitude, I could breathe more oxygen, with the result that my heart beat more strongly and I was trying to force my sluggish and cold blood round my veins too quickly. The reactions of this caused me a feeling of faintness and exhaustion that can only be appreciated by those who have experienced it. My word, I did feel ill, and when I got on the ground, the blood returning to my veins, I cannot describe as anything but agony. Now that sounds a bit like the bends that divers experience.
He seems to be almost invulnerable to the effects of lack of oxygen. But I think let's talk about the Second World War briefly, because in the Second World War, lots of pilots were flying, and they say that oxygen deprivation, hypoxia or whatever it's called, that the effects start as low as 8,000 feet, and McCudden's regularly above 16 and up to 21,000. Now, how did they test it? They tested the effects of this in the Second World War. Tell us about those experiments, Gary.
Yeah, RAF aircrew were put in pressure chambers which were then drained of oxygen, but then they were filmed to illustrate to them the dire effects that hypoxia had on their cognitive processes. The overall effect was that of stupidity, for want of a better word, and all-embracing incompetence, with a key point that they had no idea that anything was wrong. And what that makes me wonder, Pete, is whether you're operating in a chamber drained of oxygen.
My wife would say very similar things. I think my studies something occasionally. I fear that our room may be about to be
drained of all oxygen by Fred.
Yeah. So he got his last pair of victories on the 26th of February. And the first of these is typical of his methods, isn't it? So let's look at a typical victory. James McCudden, go.
What a beautiful day it was, but I felt so bad, for my throat was very sore and the cold and height were affecting it.
Are you're suffering? You're starting to suffer from health problems, aren't you?
Why are you saying that?
Carry on.
But there are a lot of the enemy to be fought, and so I stayed up and very soon saw a rumpler a few 100 feet above me returning to his lines from above Arras. I followed him in the direction of Douai and finally got to close range and fired a good burst from both my machine guns, and at once the two-seater burst into flames and then fell to pieces, the wreckage falling east of Oppy.
Now, as was usually the case, that was Vice Feldwebel Otto Kress and his observer, Lieutenant Rudolf Bintin. They're both killed. Now, McCudden's second victory that day is non-standard. That was standard. This is non-standard. This is it's a Hanover two-seater he's attacking, and he takes stupid, uncharacteristic risks, which I think you can put down to the health problems that start to build up, and also a growing fixation we'll discuss afterwards.
Captain James McCudden, 56th Squadron. I said to myself, I'm going to shoot down that Hanover or be shot down in the attempt. I secured my firing position, and placing my sight on the Hanover's fuselage, I fired both guns until the two-seater fell to pieces and the wreckage fell down slowly, a fluttering monument to my 57th victory and my last over the enemy for a time. As I looked at the machine, I saw the enemy gunner fall away from the Hanover fuselage, and I had no feeling for him, for I knew he was dead, for I had fired 300 rounds of ammunition at the Hanover at very close range, and I must have got 90% hits.
Now, inside that Hanover were Unterofficer Max Schweier and Lieutenant Walter Jaeger, both killed. They're verifiable, but this is combat fatigue and physical symptoms we're starting to get here. And he's beginning to obsess. What's he beginning to obsess on then?
Well, he starts to obsess on the score and the chance of overtaking Richthofen. But he's not alone in that. I mean, Manock did exactly the same thing.
And what was McCudden's rule? Take no risks. But you've just taken a load of risks, stupid risks. Doesn't that remind you of Manock? Manock started to disobey his old rules. Richthofen disobeyed his old. So, is there a PTSD? Is there a combat fatigue coming in here, do you think?
Yeah, I think in the modern world, all three of those, I think, would have been removed from frontline action and probably sent home for the remainder of the war, frankly.
Where there would be more use instructing and passing on all that massive accumulated knowledge.
You could argue it's a waste of their talents now. You know, they are such leaders and such icons for the age that they could have been, perhaps, for their own good, removed from active service. But
they don't want to. We found that with Manock and now with McCudden. Now, McCudden's response to being sent home, he was sent home. They did send him home and in March, there's a response to the leaving do. Tell us what he... And how atypical is this?
In bed that evening, I thought over it all, and I now, more than ever, regretted that I had to leave a life that was all, my everything to me, and I confess I cried.
That's not McCudden, is it? That's not his normal self.
No, but I think that's normal for people in great situations of stress, that becomes their life. And there is an argument that take them away from that, they don't see a meaning to their life. So I think that's quite understandable.
Now, he was on leave. He has leave. He's awarded the Victoria Cross. He's lionised by London Society. That's a good time, I think. And then he's posted as an instructor to the School of Aerial Fighting at Ayr. Oh, poor sod. That's in Scotland.
Yeah.
How he must have suffered. Here he's training. There's a Lieutenant Bogart Rogers, School of Aerial Fighting, and he said this is the impression, and this is why what you said is so important. This is what he offered, or could have offered. McCudden gave a great talk this morning, sort of opened up a bit, made it very clear that successful pilots are so only because they've worked like sin, studied every phase and detail of flying, machines and the habits and haunts of the Hun. To take him talk nonchalantly of doing in Germans at 20,000 feet, of studying all available material in order that he may know where to go and look for them, convinces you that this is surely the greatest game God created. There's nothing like it. And as an Arsenal supporter, you probably feel the need of some greater game.
Well, I was going to say, I felt the same after the FA Cup win, Pete.
Oh, think of those poor Chelsea fans, robbed only by the referee. So is McCudden happy to be an instructor, Gary?
No, I mean, if you listen to that quote, he clearly does it well. He clearly convinces them of his enthusiasm, but he's looking for return to action.
Now, he's considered for a command of the 85 Squadron, which they'd lost Major William Bishop. We'll not talk about him. And they needed sorted out. They're a conglomeration of undisciplined and underachieving free spirits, I think is a polite way of putting it. They thought of themselves as an elite, but they hadn't actually achieved very much other than Bishop. And if so, if you see what I mean, they didn't fancy having Major James McCudden, he was a major by then, a noted disciplinarian, taking over command. And this is Lieutenant John Greeder, 85 Squadron, RAF. And he says, the General came over and had tea with us and asked us, sudden change of accent, and asked us who we wanted for CO. He wanted to send us McCudden. He's Australian. I thought he was American. We don't want him. He gets hands himself, but he doesn't give anybody else a chance of them. The rest of the squadron objected because he was once a Tommy, and his father was a sergeant major in the old army. I couldn't see that was anything against him, but the English have great ideas of caste.
That's just basically snobbishness towards a man from the ranks, frankly.
Yeah, he's beyond the pale for a certain sort of officer, I suppose. There's also rumours he maximises his own kills. Yes, he does. But then so does Richtoff and so does Manock. So Manock did have some sort of sharing, but he always claimed it as well. It's just, they are the sharp cutting edge, aren't they? That's what they are. Well,
they're usually the best shots in the squadron. They're usually leading, so I don't think that's a surprise at all.
Of course, he's the cutting edge of a squadron. Anyway, he's sent to McCudden is eventually promoted to major, and sent to command the 60 Squadron, who are more accepting. He just completed his memoirs, and you should read them. 55 years with the RFC in France, which is the best account of life in the RFC in the Great War. And his closing paragraphs are quite interesting, aren't they?
Yeah, 55 years with the RFC in France.
Yes, 55 years. He'd had a tough life.
So Major James McCudden says, One or two, perhaps, of the Allied aviators will have exceeded a total of 100 enemy aeroplanes shot down.
Who's he got in mind for that?
He's got himself in mind for that, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's confident, forthright young man. Do you think he's recovered from PTSD? If he had it, this is surmise, remember. But do you think he's recovered from combat fatigue in that month or two?
No, I don't think so. But you know, in his own words, he's saying he's not going to take any dashing stunts. So, you know, there is that element of caution still.
Now, on 9th of July 1918, he takes off in a brand new, important to note, SE-5A from Hounslow, flew to Hesdin, that's the RAF headquarters in France, and then he finds himself in hazy weather over the airfield of Auxey-le-Château, which is 5 miles short where he was going to, which was, where was that? No, I can't remember. Anyway, he decides to land to get directions rather than risk landing on an airfield, because the front line was moving a lot in those days. He thought he'd just check where he was. And it's the home of 8 and 52 squadrons, so two-seaters. And McCudden makes a neat landing, asks for directions, and takes off. And this is Lieutenant L.M. Fenelon of 52 Squadron. The aircraft took off into the wind and about 100 feet did a vertical turn and flew back across the aerodrome by the side of the wood. The engine appeared to be running badly. The pilot rolled the machine, which failed to straighten out at approximately 200 feet. It crashed nose down into the woods. In those last minutes, McCudden switched off his engine to reduce the risk of fire and undid his safety belt. What's in his mind there, do you think?
His brother.
What happened to his brother?
Well, he was convinced his brother had been killed on crash landing because he was wearing the belt, and so he wasn't thrown clear because the passenger was,
with his brother,
and he survived. So McCudden, predictably, I suppose, thought that his best chance would be to be thrown clear.
And sadly, it wasn't. The ground crew and off-duty pilots run to the scene of the crash, where they find the SE-5 smashed up into the trees on the edge of the airfield. There's little hope, but it hadn't caught fire. Then they find McCudden lying under one of the wings, and he'd smashed his head. And the broken windscreen is in the War Museum if you want to see it. What's he got?
And I'm going to say, he's probably died because he did undo his seatbelt because he hit a tree when he was thrown clear.
So he never regains consciousness. He's got a badly fractured skull and dies the same day. So he was the greatest, most deadly British ace of the war. He was stopped at 57 victories. How old was he? I mean, he must have been about 40 by then, must he?
23.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Because he joined so young, and he still was so young. And I remember reading Christopher Cole's book when I was 16, and I was almost in tears when he died, because we didn't know what happened. So it was all a bit of a surprise to me when he died. And it just seems it seems unexplainable. And there's all sorts of rumours spread around. I mean, you might have heard some of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's so unexplainable. There's all sorts of rumours because there's a need to explain what seems unexplainable. So, you know, it was suggested he was drunk, for example, that he'd been stunting again on takeoff, or that he'd crashed in trying to turn back when his engine had failed. The classic beginner's mistake, you know.
My favourite is he got a walking stick caught up in the joystick and the controls. That was what I heard. They told me that themselves, you know.
But they did send an investigator, didn't they? Lieutenant Hubert Charles, who we mentioned earlier.
He served with him in 56 Squadron, yep.
So he was sent to the scene of the crash, and he found that the air intake of the carburettor was identical to the type fitted to the SE-5 in June 1917, and that had been found that on near vertical turns, and it was a very tight airfield that he was taking off from, and violent manoeuvres, it flooded the carburettor.
I don't drive. Is that good?
No, it's not a good thing, because what it means is you lose power.
So why is that a problem?
Well, if you're trying to take off in an aircraft, Pete, why would you need power?
Oh. So Fenelon, he saw McCudden employ a vertical turn on takeoff. So if he's got he's got the older, unmodified, because they modified it to remove that fault.
Yeah.
But what Charles is saying is that one of the old carburettors had been fitted to this new SE-5 in error. Is that what he's saying? It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because basically you're going to stall. You know,
So what happens? Take me through the accident. So he takes off and he banks.
Yeah, so you're going to need more power then. So he would have opened up the throttle. At that point, because the carburettor would choke, it would basically lose power. It would do the exact opposite of what he needed.
So it'd lose flying speed. So he turned on his back.
So he turned over onto his back and crashed. There was an inevitability now. At that point, it's going to happen.
Now, that was the end of him. He was dead, and his grave is kept. No, Richthofen had died not long before. There'd been a huge funeral which was filmed. Everybody was there. It was complete. Was there any of that for McCudden, or was he just, in the end, buried with no ceremony, nothing?
No, but it was taken badly by people that knew him. Edward Mannock, for example, took it particularly badly. So he was remembered by those who knew him, but publicly, and it's probably because of what you said earlier, Peter, that you're holding up these people as almost invincible heroes, and so you don't want to publicise the fact that he died. And certainly not in the circumstances that he died.
So that probably explains why Richthofen was given publicity, because he's German, and we buried him with a lot of fuss to draw attention to it. McCudden was British, buried quietly. I think that explains that. Now, so there we go. McCudden, he scaled the heights, lowly origins, if you like, scaled the heights thanks to his own abilities, his intelligence, and his and the unwillingness to take unnecessary chances in his prime, but in the end he died.
But he also demonstrates, as you say, the very first quote to how he was towards the end. The romance of the air is very short lived, and he becomes a killing machine. That's what his job is.
Right. Well, it's been a great story. I can never decide which I prefer, McCudden or Mannock. They're both such great aces, and we've covered both now. If you want to hear more about Mannock, listen to that. The other thing we'd ask you to do, and every podcast asks you to do this, if you could review our podcasts on any of the whichever podcast means you use, could you review it and say we're lovely? Try not to mention our swearing, our forgetting things, and our appalling accents. I apologise for Gary's McCudden accent. Thank you.
He was from Sheppey. That's exactly the accent he would have had.
You mean he spoke like you, Gary?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. In that case, I'll congratulate you. Thank you very much, Gary. It's been great fun, and goodbye.
Cheers, Pete.
Cheers, mate.